I realised that when I was in the garden, I had that same feeling like I had as a child, being lost in play. You know, when you feel you're in your own world, you feel safe, and you've got a sense of freedom somehow, inner freedom, and your mind can just sort of wander as well. I think that's a lot of what gardening does for people. You know, cardiovascular level, we know being out in nature, within minutes, your blood pressure drops a bit, your heart rate settles down, your cortisol levels, your stress hormone levels drop within about 30 minutes. I think it's absolutely the centre of my life. It's kind of like a place I always want to come back to and I don't want to leave.
Hi, Sue.
Hi, Matt.
So could you just describe what you do for us? Because obviously a lot of people will be very familiar with your amazing book, The Well-Gardened Mind. But beyond the book, what else is it that you do professionally?
I still do some psychotherapy practice, which is for a not-for-profit called Doc Health. It looks after doctors suffering from stress and burnout and depression and so on. And then my main role really is running the project, the Serge Hill Project, which is a community interest company that I founded with Tom. We set it up about 2 years ago now. And we have a whole programme of visiting schools, community groups. We've started a social prescribing initiative for people recovering from cancer treatment. We've got links with 2 local charities who regularly bring groups. Another community group for people suffering from dementia and their carers. They come on a seasonal basis and do art projects with us. So we've got a whole programme, different kinds of connecting with different groups in the community. And I think we've had, in terms of school visits, we've had about 600 or 700 kids through the plant library and to the Apple House since we opened.
It's amazing. It's very generous, I think, to open up your home in that way to the community.
Having written my book and having been very inspired by some of the projects I visited, and with Tom moving his studio back here, it felt like it made sense. And I don't know about generosity. I think you could see it like that, but it's not how I would see it. I think because you get back so much too.
Yeah. What do you get from it?
It's very enriching. Meeting lots of interesting people, seeing kids who arrive down there sort of just open up. You know, it's like they arrive in a sort of nervous state, or and you can see they're stressed. We have a couple of pastoral care groups that come, and by the end of the visit, they're in a very different space. And all one can hope is that, you know, they may take away something from that, something from being in connection with nature. Maybe they've been sowing seeds. Maybe they've been doing artworks inside. We often let kids choose their favourite flower from the plant library, and then they can go, and we have some lovely Victorian, like inkwell specimen vases. So they can sit there with their own chosen flower and draw it or paint it, whatever they feel like doing.
So I want to talk to you obviously about the Well-Gardened Mind, but before we do that, can I just take you back to your own experience of being a child, because you referenced children there. What was your engagement with nature when you were young? Where did you grow up?
I went to school in Wimbledon, so I spent quite a lot of time in Richmond Park as a child, riding and so on. Did quite a lot of sailing. My father was a keen sailor. We had boats on the Thames at various different times. Did a lot of dinghy sailing as well as motor sailing. Always loved being outdoors. And I think the other thing that one connection between childhood and for me and gardening is to do with play. Because I realised, you know, when I was writing the book, I really tried to analyse what was going on for me when I was gardening, because I'd never really noticed it particularly. I knew I felt better, but in the course of writing the book, I thought I've got to actually drill down into this and understand it. And I realised that when I was in the garden, in the veg garden particularly, which is sort of a bit more my patch, I had that same feeling like a child, like I had as a child, being lost in play. You know, when you feel you're in your own world, you feel safe, and you've got a sense of sort of freedom somehow, inner freedom, and your mind can just sort of wander as well. I think that's a lot of what gardening does for people. Other things can do that too. Obviously, play does it for kids. Creative crafts can do it too.
Yeah. So when you're at university, you lost your father, is that right?
Yeah, he died in my final year,
Okay.
and he was ill on and off throughout my childhood.
Okay. How formative was that for you in terms of what you do now? And did you get into gardening at that point, or?
No, I didn't get into gardening immediately, and it was very, very formative because actually I was doing an English degree.
Okay.
I was at Cambridge doing an English degree, and I'd always loved literature, but I'd also liked the sciences at school, and I'd not been able to study both of them at A-level because of the timetable clash. So I went for the arts, and towards the end of my English degree, I was thinking I didn't quite know what I wanted to do with it. I'd always thought I'd be a journalist. And I'd done some journalism, and I began to feel, particularly with my father dying and spending a lot of time in hospital during that last year, I think I just began to feel I want to be doing something rather than writing about what other people are doing, if that makes sense.
Sure, yeah.
I want to be actually directly engaged, and I want to work in some way with people. And I'd always loved biology and chemistry. So I went back, having done my English degree, and did A-levels, and then went to medical school in London.
Wow, so that's quite a U-turn.
In some ways it was, in some ways it wasn't. I mean, it's, for me, I think this divide between arts and sciences is such a sad thing.
Yeah, it's a bit of an arbitrary one at times.
It is an arbitrary one.
Yeah.
And of course, I always knew, I was always interested in the mind. I'd studied Freud, rather strangely, as part of my English degree.
Right.
And so I'd developed that interest. And I think going into psychiatry was, for me, very much as connected to English as it was to medicine.
Okay.
Because you're always looking at people, hearing people's stories. You're always helping them explore their own stories.
That's so interesting.
You know, whether you become, I then became a psychotherapist as well, but even if you don't, as a psychiatrist, your first encounter with a patient is often quite long. It's usually an hour and a half.
Yeah.
And you review their whole life history. And sometimes you help people make connections that they've never seen before in their life. You know, they've never sort of connected certain events with certain other events in their life.
That's really interesting.
I didn't see it as a separate, very different thing.
So what was the actual journey into becoming a psychiatrist then?
Well, it's quite a long training.
Okay.
I did it part-time.
Okay.
We had children by then.
Ah.
I was a student for a very, very long time.
How long
somewhere
is long,
along the
then?
way, I did a PhD as well. So I really am.
Really?
I like studying, just like I liked researching for my book.
Yeah. So let's talk about your book then, The Well Gardened Mind, which was a kind of huge bestseller. Were you expecting that?
No, of course not.
Yeah. It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Why do you think it captured the imagination? And for those who aren't aware of it, could you just a quick synopsis of it?
Well, it is a book about gardening. It's also a book about the mind.
Yeah.
And I worked on it for about 5 years. I was still working in the NHS for a lot of that time. I did a lot of research. I felt if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it really well and really properly. I felt a lot of what existed already about gardening and its benefits. It was saying all the right things in many ways, but not really drilling down into the detail or kind of looking at some of the deeper existential meanings that people get from working with nature. And I really wanted to understand that better. I'd grown up from my mother hearing the story of her father, my grandfather, who had been a prisoner of war during the First World War in Turkey. He'd been captured. He was a very young man. And he was really lucky to survive. Something like 70% of prisoners of war didn't make it home. So And he didn't talk about it much later, but she knew enough about it to sort of tell a bit of the story. So he recovered afterwards, having been very malnourished, very traumatised, through gardening. He got the chance to go on a horticultural rehabilitation programme. At that point, I didn't know where that was or what it had consisted of. And my mother was still alive when I started writing the book, so I went back and tried to find out as much as she knew. And then through my cousin as well, I found out a bit more. And then the Hampshire Gardens Trust helped me find the garden where he'd had that experience. And so that whole narrative is woven into the book. And that was really important for me, actually.
Yeah. How do you describe that connection between physically tending a garden, but also tending to your own inner life at the same time?
So I think there are times in life when we have a lot to sort out internally, whatever the causes of that are. And I think that's when something like gardening can be really helpful. And I suppose I experienced that firsthand, following a long period of stress in my work. And I really began to notice if I went into work on a Monday and I hadn't been gardening, it was still as if I was sort of carrying the whole previous week on my shoulders, you know. Whereas if I'd been gardening, somehow something happens in parallel, I think, when we work with our hands. You're able to sort of, you know, metabolize things, turn them over, work them through a bit. Just being in nature is de-stressing and calming. And I think just also if you're feeling beleaguered and like, oh, everything's closing down or you're losing something or you've lost something, the very act of working with the natural growth force and the cycle of life, you know, intrinsically gives you a sense of something better to come, something good to come. You know, it might not give you hope, or you might call it hope, but at some level, it's sort of getting you thinking about the future when perhaps you've been very, very preoccupied with the past, what's been going on in far past or recent past.
Yeah. Is there a sort of flow thing to it?
Absolutely, but I think flow is such a broad term. I don't think flow is the only thing that's going on.
Yeah. So from a physiological perspective, what's happening in the nervous system and the brain when you're gardening?
Oh, I think lots of different things. But I think, you know, cardiovascular level, we know being out in nature, you quite rapidly, actually, within minutes, you know, your blood pressure drops a bit, your heart rate settles down, your cortisol levels, your stress hormone levels drop within about 30 minutes. And you can get that from being in a park. It doesn't have to be in a garden.
Yeah.
But I think the difference is the hands-on, hands in the soil. We're getting also exposure to all the beneficial bacteria in the soil. And there are various theories about that.
Yeah, so is it microbes?
Yeah, microbes. One in particular, Mycobacterium vaccae, which has been linked to release of serotonin. It's quite hard to demonstrate in humans, but it's been shown in animal models. And I do think this thing of actually being part of nature, I think we can recover our own sense of our sort of biological, the fact that we're a biological being too, you know, and we're one of many inhabitants in a garden.
Yes, exactly.
And, you know, and I think that's something people often experience quite intensely during the pandemic. If they were, you know, people who were lucky enough to have a garden and people spent so much sort of time in it and they suddenly realised how many birds visit and all the insects that are there, the butterflies and so on.
So obviously the Japanese famously do forest bathing, don't they? Which is sort of walking in the woods and soaking in that very rich air that's in the woodlands. But would you say that you could even go as far as prescribing gardening or being outside as something that will help people who are struggling? Is that a thing that one could do? I mean, I
think it's happening already.
Is it? Yeah.
Yeah. There's a movement for green prescribing or green care. We have a social prescribing group in the plant library, and And we set that up about 6 months ago. It took quite a while. You know, working with the NHS is a bit slow, but we've got it off the ground. And that particular group is for people recovering from cancer treatments. And they come and they engage one afternoon a week in gardening and other activities. And, you know, part of that is the group effect. You know, that they're often quite isolated and lonely and struggling. But a lot of it is also, you know, working with nature.
So if somebody listening to this is struggling in some way, depression, anxiety, all these things that we do struggle with, what would you recommend to them? Like, where should they start if they're listening to this? How should they address nature in that way, in the right way?
Well, I think if you want to join a community group, find out what's in your local area.
Yeah.
There's now a fantastic online resource called Gardening for Health, with the digit 4, which was set up by Richard Claxton, who's a GP and is now the director of the National Garden Scheme. And find out what's out there. Yeah. And be brave and go and sign up. You know, if you've got your own garden and you've been, you know, not very engaged in it, try and re-engage.
Yeah. Do you think it's even, would you go as far as to say it could be an alternative to medication sometimes?
I think that's one of the aims behind green prescribing and social prescribing, but it can equally be in addition to.
Yeah, complement.
Because medication, it doesn't have to be either or.
Yeah.
But sometimes I think people are, you know, the prescription pad is reached for too quickly.
Yeah.
So it's always worth exploring what the alternatives might be.
Yeah.
And there's some great examples of, you know, there's the Lambeth GP Food Cooperative in London, where a group of GPs have set up gardens within their own practices.
Oh, wow. That's very cool.
There's a lot of very interesting stuff going on.
Yeah, yeah. Have you seen any change in neurodiverse people and neurodivergence in terms of helping them specifically through gardens?
One of our most frequent school visitors is our local learning disability school. And we also work very closely with the charity Sunnyside Rural Trust, who help adults with various neurodivergent issues. And they have a little nursery behind, which you probably saw.
Yeah.
So they're there 5 days a week. So absolutely, I think one thing that's very well documented is that particularly for people who suffer from sensory overload very easily, so, you know, being in busy streets or noisy rooms is really hard for them. Being out in a garden or in a natural setting is immediately much more calming and life becomes more manageable. Yeah. And they can sort of process their thoughts and feelings better. Yeah. I think that's sort of quite well established now, but it's a pity it's not more available.
Yeah. In terms of you and your own well-being, how often are you out in the garden?
It varies enormously on the time of year, how busy I am, how much I'm travelling. I travel quite a bit with the book still, because it's come out in something amazing like 18 languages.
So it's still coming out in different places?
It's still coming out in different places,
tour.
Yes. The latest one was Croatia.
Wow.
It's out in Ukraine.
Oh, wow.
I haven't visited Ukraine, but I've done quite a lot of online talks and events for Ukraine. So it does depend how much I'm here. Yeah. But I like to dip in. I don't like to lose contact altogether. And I'm still obsessed by sowing seeds. I always start in the early spring sowing seeds inside the house because I like to watch them germinate.
A quick interlude to let you know that there's a garden tour to accompany this episode, which is available to insiders on Patreon. Here's a short preview.
When the children were small, we had a climbing frame on the lawn there, a wooden climbing frame. Yeah. And this was a rose garden. And then we had a sand pit and a wooden Wendy house at the end there. And the reason I'm standing here is because Tom said, why don't you have a herb? I wanted to grow herbs, culinary herbs and medicinal herbs. Why don't you have a herb plot here? And it was perfect because it was very close to the sand pit and the climbing frame. Yeah. And so it was a very good way of starting.
So this
And
is
that's
this
what
is
got
where
me
it all
going.
started.
This is where it started, yeah, yeah.
And now it's some paving.
Now it's not, yes, it's very, well, you know, because we didn't have the veg garden then.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. But that's the thing. But that's
so we didn't have a
It's had
vegetable
lots
garden.
of different lives, though,
Yeah,
hasn't
it's
it?
had lots of different
Yeah.
lives, yeah. So I love the way there's so many different memories encoded in a garden, in a place.
And is there anything else that you do in a sort of ritualistic way, just for your own mind?
I'm not a very routine person,
Yeah.
I have to confess. I like to, if I can, my best kind of days often unfold in a slightly unpredictable way.
Oh, do they?
Because I can feel I can respond to, you know, what the weather's like.
Yeah.
So I'm not someone who will go for a walk at a set time every day.
Yeah.
But I might go out for a walk in the garden
Yeah.
when the sun's out.
Yeah.
And I'll wait for the sun to come out and hope it coincides with a gap in my schedule.
That's quite good. I mean, it means you're malleable, right?
Yes. I mean, if I've got something to do, I do it. You know, as I write in my book, I was very disciplined about putting in good chunks of work, but I wasn't somebody who had to sit at my desk at sort of 7 a.m. and do 3 hours. I like to wait for the inspiration as well.
Is it the case that when you practice professionally, you also have to have done your own therapy? Is that true?
Absolutely, to be a psychotherapist, yes. Yeah. I think going back to the routine thing as well, the life of a psychotherapist is very timetabled.
Okay.
You know, you have your patients at set times. So I think there's always been something in me when I've not got that. I still have that to some extent, you know, that I have certain appointments that I have to, then I really relish the freedom to think, I'll do whatever I feel like doing in the other time, whatever's calling to me to do.
Yeah. So in terms of your own life then, I mean, what's been the most difficult period for you? I mean, you know, it seems to me that if you help people professionally in this area, it's also because you understand it at quite a visceral level yourself. So, you know, what have been your own experiences around it yourself?
I think recovering from losing my father was a big one.
Yeah.
And in some ways you never fully recover, but sort of learning how to live with it and make sense of it. He was only 47 when he died.
Was he?
And I was very close to him, so it was a very big loss. And I think, you know, at different times in my life I felt it, but certainly when I had my own therapy, you know, that was a large focus of it.
Was it quite out of the blue for you, that then? I mean, him being so young.
It wasn't out of the blue. He had a bone marrow disorder, and he was ill on and off from when I was about 7.
Oh, wow.
So we knew he had this condition, but he was also a very fit, strong man. So, you know, he had various health crises and then he always recovered. So you sort of think somehow he'll go on recovering.
Yeah.
And then eventually it became clear that he wasn't going to.
Yeah. And what about your mum then? Tell us a bit about her.
So my mum lived to the age of 92.
Oh, wow.
And after about 15 years on her own, she remarried. So she had another 20-year-long marriage. My stepfather was wonderful. And so, yeah, I think, and she loved gardening. And one of the things I really noticed in her, after my father died, we moved to the Cotswolds and she took on a cottage which had a rather neglected garden, about an acre of garden. And I could see how much benefit she was getting in dealing with her mourning through all the sort of digging and clearing and replanting that she was doing. And I wasn't even really thinking about gardening then, but I noticed it.
So thinking about this place, your home, you've been here since your 20s?
Yeah, I think I was 27
27.
when we moved here, yeah.
So this is Tom's family estate. His grandfather bought it originally in the 1920s.
Yeah.
So he's obviously got a generational sense of belonging to this part of the world, this area, this plot of land.
Yeah.
But for you, you've had to acquire that. So what was it like for you when you first moved here? Did you feel like you were moving to Tom's family house, or?
Strangely not, actually, because we used to go and stay with his parents before we moved here. And that did feel like, obviously, we were in his family home, in his parents' home. You know, we were so fortunate to have this chance to convert a barn with a lot of help from his parents, physical help as well as financial help. You know, it was starting from scratch, both the house and the garden. So I think we felt a bit like pioneers, really.
Yeah.
I don't think we felt like we were having to fit into, or I was having to fit into, you know, his family model, if you like, because we could make it up.
Yeah. Well, you've basically created everything from scratch, actually, haven't you? The
Pretty
garden
much.
and then the house. So what's inside
Pretty
the house?
much, yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So
Which is an incredible opportunity, actually.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
So after many years here now, how would you summarise what this place means to you and its place in your life generally?
I think it's absolutely the centre of my life. It's kind of like the place I always want to come back to and I don't want to leave.
So we've heard a bit about your story, and I'd love to actually take from that something practical that people can take away with them. So if you were to, I suppose if someone's listening and, you know, they've never done gardening before and they understand from this that it's a beneficial thing for them to do, like, where do you think they should start?
I think the key thing is start growing things that you love. So what got me growing was vegetables. And actually, before that, culinary herbs, because I'd always loved cooking. So that was my way into gardening, was through food. So, you know, people sometimes say, oh, if I grow sort of almost like, if I grow pink flowers, will that be better for me than if I grow white flowers?
Okay.
I think you just grow, you know, we all love different colours. I love blue, you know, so I'll often grow blue flowers. But it's just grow what you love.
Yeah.
And I think if you really are beginning, start with things that are fairly simple.
Like what kind of thing?
Well, if it's food, I think start with radishes and grow some sunflowers or nasturtiums. I mean, nasturtiums, you can't go wrong.
Yeah.
So I think just start simple. You know, don't go to the garden centre and buy loads of things that you know, they may not have been looked after particularly well, and then you think because they don't flourish, it's your fault. You know, start growing things from seed. Start growing things from seed, and then you see the whole life cycle.
Yeah. And what about if they don't have any outside space? What are the options then?
I think, you know, there's always window boxes or windowsills.
Yeah, herbs are good, aren't they?
Herbs are great.
Yeah.
I grow lots of herbs.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think even just getting out and, you know, joining a community garden or, you know, get on the waiting list for an allotment. There's some parts of the country that you can almost be in, you know, a pensioner by the time you come up.
Yeah.
So, you know,
Yeah.
some of the waiting lists are about 40 years long, I think.
Yeah.
But in some parts of the country, actually, they're quite good. So don't assume that. So I think there's so much available online now in terms of, you know, look at Charles Dowding if you're interested in growing food, his no-dig methods, and he's got loads of really good videos. There's just, the great thing about gardening is there's always stuff to learn.
Yeah. So what about kids then? How do we get kids into it?
Kids, yeah, well, that's what we're doing a lot of, actually. I think you have to make it fun and give them their own little plot if you can.
Yeah, I read a very depressing thing recently, which is that on average, children in the UK spend less time outside than people in prison, which is 45 minutes.
I quote that in my book, actually.
Do you quote it in your book?
Yeah.
I mean, it's ridiculous, isn't it? 45 minutes, so less than 45 minutes a day.
Yeah.
Children are outside.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess the step one is to just take them to the park sometimes.
I think so. Yeah. And playing outdoors, exploring. I'm passionate about children's need to play.
Yeah. And what about overall sort of community initiatives to, you know, green the streets and to, just generally help people on an everyday level just engage with nature? I mean, is there anything on that front that you can think of?
I think the most inspiring project, which I write about in the book, is the Incredible Edible project in Todmorden outside Manchester, which started in 2008 and sort of has transformed the townscape completely. And, you know, there's just planters everywhere. There are little veg plots which people can help themselves to. So I think, and it's really made a big difference to the community, the sense of community there. And the schools, it's got the schools gardening. So I think, you know, you start little by little. So I think greening in cities is a public health issue. If you look at the impact of green space and the impact of not having green space, it's really quite significant. When I researched the chapter called Nature in the Cities for my book, I was absolutely staggered by the scale of some of the effects that are seen from having a park next to, let's say, social housing project. If there's a park or if there are gardens, the difference that makes is huge.
Yeah.
And there's some very, very compelling research done in places like Chicago, Philadelphia, on reducing crime, increasing well-being, even reducing diabetes and obesity. I mean, it's across the spectrum. People are just healthier and actually behave better.
Well, there's that thing called broken windows theory, isn't there? Do you know that one?
Yeah.
Which is that obviously, you know, if the built environment is a bit shambolic, it perpetuates that kind of behaviour.
Yeah. And I think if the built environment is in a slightly deteriorated state, you can actually do an awful lot by planting flowers.
Yeah.
You know, one of the people I think was a real pioneer of all this was Patrick Geddes, who, before the First World War, was working in the old town, in the tenements in Edinburgh. And one of the first things he did was to get people to make window boxes and sow annual flowers in them.
Yeah.
And, you know, just the difference a little bit of beauty makes if your surroundings are very bleak.
Yeah.
It's not to be underestimated.
Yeah. So interesting. I want to ask you quickly about attachment theory. Mm-hmm. So some people might know attachment theory, but it's the idea that your relationship with your primary caregiver, usually your mother, in some way dictates your attachment style, which is how you react in relationships moving forward and so on. Yeah. But there's also something which I'm really fascinated by, which is place attachment. Yeah. Which is the idea that alongside attaching to our mother, we also attach to the place that we're brought up in.
Yes, yeah.
In the context of you and your own life, can you describe your own place attachment? Because I'm really interested in that whole field. You know, where do you feel that you belong, if you see what I mean?
Well, I think I've lived here so long now, I do feel I belong here. But I think we used to, as kids, we used to sleep on our boat on weekends on the river. We'd go up and down the River Thames. And so I do love that. I like being on boats too. I like being on the water. I like being near the water. So I love our pond.
Okay. Was that your idea then, the pond?
No, it wasn't actually. It was Tom's idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't really anticipate how much the pond would come to mean in that way.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So you said when we were walking around that you're not a massive fan of the cold water.
Of cold water, yes. Of getting in winter, yes. Yeah.
So how does the pond play into your life? I mean, do you...
Well, it's just so beautiful to gaze at the water.
Yeah. What kind of wildlife is it attracted then, the pond?
In summer, it's thriving with dragonflies and all sorts of things, and lots of birds. There's a wonderful heron that comes and visits. We've got various ducks that come. We've had ducklings, which is very exciting, and I think the fox has got them each time. But it's just a really calming place to go and be. So if I do a walk, when I do a walk, it's always part of that. Yeah. Is to go and sit by the pond. Yeah,
it's lovely. So moving forward then, what are your plans for this place, and how do you see it evolving over the next few years? Indeed, if at all. I mean, do you feel like you're in a good place now, or what do you think it will look like in 5 or 10 years?
I think we are in a good place. I said to Becky Fincham, who is our head of programs at the Serge Hill Project, that I felt, we'd done a lot in the last 15 months. In a way, I think the next year is about consolidating that and coming to feel that, we know we can deliver all of this. I'm always wary of sort of trying to grow something too fast. But we do want to do more, and we are doing this outreach work, which I think is really important. I love the idea of kids coming and sowing seeds or potting things on, and then we can look after them for a bit, and then they can go back to the school, and there can be this sense of continuity, literally a sort of thread that goes between the garden here and the school out there.
Well, I really admire what you've done here. I think it's really amazing. I've had such an inspiring day, I have to say.
Glad.
And it's really, really nice to talk to someone in a greenhouse, which is a first for me as well.
Isn't it? Yeah.
So thank you very much, Sue.
No, not at all.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.